The watch almost cost Raymond Holt everything he had left, and the man who sold it to him knew exactly what he was doing. Raymond Holt walked into Carver Sons Horology on a Tuesday afternoon in late October with $43 in his wallet and a photograph of his wife in his shirt pocket. He wasn't there to spend money. He was there because his daughter Sophie had seen the watch in the window 3 days earlier and said it looked like the one in the picture her mother used to keep on the nightstand. The one that disappeared after the funeral, along with most things that mattered. Sophie was 7. She didn't ask for much. She had learned not to. Raymond was 41 years old. He had grease under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing fully removed, because he worked 6 days a week in a repair shop off Route 9 outside of Millhaven, Ohio, fixing engines that other people had given up on. He was good at it. He was, in fact, exceptionally good at it. The kind of mechanic who could listen to a motor running and tell you which cylinder was misfiring before he lifted the hood. But the shop paid him hourly, and the hours were never quite enough, and the apartment above the laundromat on Garfield Street was drafty in November, and Sophie needed new boots before the cold came in for real. He had not planned to go inside, but Sophie had pressed her palm flat against the glass and said, "Daddy, it looks just like Mama's." And Raymond had looked at the watch behind the display. Old silvery with a cracked leather strap and a face slightly fogged at the edge, and he had felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt in 2 years. So he went inside. Gerald Carver III was standing behind the counter when Raymond pushed open the door. The bell above the frame rang once. Gerald looked up from the ledger he was writing in and took in Raymond the way some men take in a room, quickly, dismissively, filing him under a category before he had said a single word. The work jacket, the jeans with the worn knees, the child holding his hand. "Help you?" Gerald said. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. Raymond told him about the watch in the window, the silver one with the fogged face. Gerald set down his pen and moved to the display case with the unhurried ease of a man who has already decided how a conversation will end. He lifted the watch out and placed it on the glass counter without a cloth beneath it, which told Raymond something, though he couldn't have said exactly what. "Elgin pocket watch," Gerald said, "converted to wristwatch sometime in the 40s probably. Mechanisms shot, crystals cracked, straps original, but dry rotted." He picked it up and turned it over. Decorative piece at this point, nothing more. Raymond asked what he was asking for it. Gerald named a price that was more than Raymond made in 3 days. Raymond looked at the watch for a moment. Sophie was standing beside him, not saying anything, holding 2 fingers of his hand the way she did when she was trying not to ask for something she already knew the answer to. He told Gerald he didn't have that kind of money right now. He asked if he could come back, whether Gerald would hold it. Gerald smiled. It was a particular kind of smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes because it was never meant to. "I don't hold pieces for walk-ins," he said. "And honestly, sir, this one isn't really worth your time. It's decorative. Broken. You'd be paying for sentiment, not value." He said the word sentiment, the way a person says a word they don't believe in. Raymond thanked him and guided Sophie back toward the door. He heard Gerald pick up his pen before they had fully turned around. In the car, Sophie didn't cry. She just looked out the window at the shop as Raymond pulled out of the parking space, and she said, "It's okay, Daddy." The way children say things that are not okay, but have learned to call them okay because they've seen what the other option costs you. Raymond drove home. He made grilled cheese for dinner. He read Sophie 2 chapters of the book she liked, the one about the girl who finds a door in a tree, and when she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and looked at the photograph of his wife for a long time. Her name had been Claire. She had died 26 months ago from a cardiac event that the doctors described as rare, and the insurance company described as a pre-existing condition, which meant the life policy paid out at a fraction of what they had counted on. Raymond had not been angry at the insurance company in a way that went anywhere. He had simply put the paperwork in a folder and gone back to work and made sure Sophie had what she needed. He was still doing that. He sat at the table until almost midnight. Then he took out a piece of paper and wrote down the name of the watch. Elgin converted. Fogged crystal. Cracked face. He wrote it the way he wrote down engine specs. Not because he knew what he would do with it, but because the habit of writing things down before you understood them had served him well. He put the paper in his jacket pocket and went to bed. The library on Prescott Street had 3 computers available in the morning before 9 o'clock, and Raymond was there when they opened. Sophie was in school. He had 2 hours before his shift. He typed Elgin pocket watch wristwatch conversion 1940s into the search bar and started reading. What he found took him down a path he had not expected. Elgin watches were American-made, he learned, one of the oldest watchmakers in the country, operating out of Elgin, Illinois, from the 1860s until the factory closed in 1968. During the Second World War, the company had produced precision instruments for the military. After the war, certain models were converted, the pocket movements fitted into wristwatch cases. For returning servicemen who wanted the quality of the old mechanism in a format that suited the new world they were coming back to. Some of those conversions were common. Hundreds of thousands of them. Some were not. Raymond read for 90 minutes without moving. He found a forum post from a horological society in Pennsylvania. He found a catalog from a 1987 auction in New York. He found a photograph that stopped him cold. The photograph showed a watch. It was not the same watch, but the case, the shape of the case, the profile of the crown, the particular way the lug curved at the bottom left, matched what he had seen on Gerald Carver's counter. The catalog listed that watch at $42,000. The auction record showed it sold for $61,000. Raymond sat very still for a moment. Then he closed the browser history, thanked the librarian on his way out, and drove to work. He spent his lunch break on the phone with a woman named Patricia Dowd, who ran an estate sale company out of Columbus and had been recommended to him 3 years ago by a customer whose mother had left behind a garage full of things nobody knew how to value. Raymond had helped Patricia's brother-in-law get an old Ford Galaxie running again, and she had never forgotten it. He told her what he'd seen. He described the case, the crown, the fog on the crystal, the converted movement. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Raymond, do you know what a Series 571 Elgin military conversion looks like?" He told her he was starting to learn. She said, "If that's what's sitting in Gerald Carver's display case, he either knows exactly what he has and is pricing it to move quietly, or he has absolutely no idea and priced it to get rid of it." She paused. Neither one of those situations is good for Gerald. Raymond asked her what she thought it was worth. She said she'd have to see it. She said she knew a man in Cincinnati who could authenticate it in 2 hours. She said, "Don't buy it yet. Let me come look first." Raymond said, "I can't afford to buy it." Patricia said, "That's the second thing we need to talk about." She came to Millhaven on a Thursday, which was Raymond's day off. They drove together to Carver Sons. Raymond let her go in first. He waited outside with Sophie, who was home from school with a sniffle that wasn't quite a fever. Patricia spent 11 minutes in the shop. Raymond knew because he looked at his phone twice. When she came out, she was wearing the expression he had seen on her face once before, the time she had opened a box at an estate sale in Zanesville and found a signed first edition of something that had made her go completely silent. She stopped on the sidewalk. She looked at Raymond. She said very quietly, "He has no idea." The movement in Raymond's chest happened again. He kept his face still. "The case has a stamp on the inner backplate," Patricia said. "Gerald opened it for me. He thought I was a collector, which I am technically. The stamp is a military production mark from 1944. The conversion is period correct. The crystal is cracked, but the movement is intact underneath the fog. I could see the balance wheel ticking when he held it to the light." She looked back at the shop. "Raymond, that is almost certainly a Series 571. The last one that went to auction sold for $88,000. Sophie sneezed. Raymond handed her a tissue without looking away from Patricia. He said, He told me the mechanism was shot. Patricia said, the mechanism is not shot. He either doesn't know the difference between a fogged crystal and a dead movement, which is possible. He's primarily a retail jeweler who inherited a watch case from his father, or he's lying. Which I don't think he is, because nobody prices an $88,000 watch at what he's asking. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What did he tell you it was worth?" Patricia named a number. It was the same number Gerald had quoted Raymond 4 days earlier. It was less than 1% of what the watch might actually be. Raymond nodded slowly. He took Sophie's hand. He said, "Can we make this work?" Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I think we have to try." The agreement they reached was straightforward. Patricia had a line of credit with a small investment group in Columbus that funded estate acquisitions. She would front the purchase price. Raymond would handle the authentication logistics. He knew people, and more importantly, people knew him, and in the particular world of mechanical things, reputation moved faster than money. When the watch sold, they would split the margin 60-40 in Raymond's favor because it was his find, and Patricia believed in honoring that. Raymond went back to Gerald Carver's shop alone the following Monday. He wore the same jacket. He had Sophie's drawing of a horse in his breast pocket because he always carried something of hers. Gerald looked up from the counter when he came in. The recognition was slow, the kind of slow that told Raymond he had not made an impression worth remembering. Raymond said he'd been thinking about the watch. He said his daughter had really taken to it. He said he understood it was decorative and broken, like Gerald had told him, and he didn't have a lot to spend, but he wondered if Gerald would take a little less given the condition. Gerald reached into the display case without enthusiasm. He set the watch on the counter. "It's a sentimental purchase," Gerald said, repeating the word from before, wearing it like a verdict. "For that price, you're really just buying the look of a thing." Raymond picked up the watch. He held it the way he held engine components, with complete attention, without performance. He turned it over. He looked at the case back. He set it down. He said, "I'll take it." Gerald wrote up the receipt without asking for Raymond's name. The authenticator in Cincinnati was a man named Dr. Thomas Weyrich, who had spent 30 years as a horological conservator at a museum before retiring to a workroom behind his house in Hyde Park, where he saw clients by appointment only. Patricia had called ahead. Raymond drove down on a Wednesday morning with the watch in a padded case borrowed from Patricia's inventory. Dr. Weyrich examined the watch for 1 hour and 40 minutes without speaking except to ask Raymond twice to hand him a different loop. When he was finished, he set down his tools and removed his magnifying headset and looked at Raymond across the workbench. He said, "Where did you find this?" Raymond told him, "Doctor." Weyrich shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, but in the particular way of a man who has spent decades watching valuable things pass through careless hands. "The movement is a grade 571, military contract, 1944. The conversion was done by a specialist shop in Chicago. There are 3 of them I know of that did this kind of work for returning officers after the war. The case has hand engraving on the inner backplate that was partially obscured by oxidation. I've cleaned it." He turned the watch over and held it under the bench light. "Read what it says." Raymond leaned forward. The engraving was small and precise, for the man who fixes what others leave behind. ECH 1946. Raymond read it twice. He thought about the woman in the photograph on his nightstand. He thought about the engine he had rebuilt last week that 3 other shops had told the owner was unsalvageable. He thought about Sophie saying, "It's okay, Daddy," on the way home from the shop, her hand warm in his, not asking for the thing she wanted. He didn't say any of that. He just looked at the engraving for a moment longer than necessary, and then straightened up. Dr. Weyrich said the watch was authentic, provenance confirmed, and in better mechanical condition than its exterior suggested. He put his assessment in writing. He said, "The market for military contract Elgins with documented conversion and original engraving had been active in the last 18 months. He said he would be surprised if it sold for less than $90,000 at a reputable auction house, and would not be surprised if it went higher. He charged Raymond a flat fee for the authentication, shook his hand at the door, and said, "The man who sold this to you, was he unkind about it?" Raymond considered the question. He said he thought he knew what he was looking at. "Dr. Wayrick said, they always do." The auction was handled through a house in Cleveland that Patricia had worked with before. They listed the watch with Dr. Wayrick's documentation, 3 high-resolution photographs, and a provenance note about the engraving. The listing went live on a Friday. Raymond didn't watch the bidding in real time. He was working. He was always working. He found out the result the following Tuesday when Patricia called him at the shop while he had an alternator in his hands. She said, "Raymond," he said, "tell me." She said $112,000. He set the alternator down on the workbench very carefully. The shop was loud around him, the compressor running, the radio on, another mechanic working on something in the far bay. He walked to the back door and stood outside in the cold air behind the building, next to the dumpster and the stack of old tires, and he put his hand on the cinder block wall and breathed. He thought about Gerald Carver standing behind the counter with his pen and his ledger and his particular smile, telling Raymond the watch wasn't worth his time. He thought about the word sentiment, the way Gerald had said it, like a small stone dropped on the floor. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt something quieter than that, something that didn't have a clean name. He went back inside and finished the alternator. He picked Sophie up from school at 3:15. She got in the car and buckled her seatbelt and told him about a project her class was doing on weather patterns. He listened to the whole thing. At the light on Millfield Avenue, he said, "Hey, you remember that watch in the window? At that shop downtown?" Sophie said, "The one that looked like Mama's." Raymond said, "Yeah, that one." He looked straight ahead at the light. "I found out it was worth a lot of money, more than we thought." Sophie was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Did you buy it?" He said, "I did, and then I sold it. And now we have enough for your school trip to Washington and new winter boots and maybe something for the apartment." Sophie thought about this for a moment. The light changed. She said, "Can we still get a watch that looks like Mama's sometime? Just a regular one?" Raymond looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window at the street going by, her chin resting on her hand, not particularly sad, just asking. He said, "Yeah, we can do that." He drove the rest of the way home without the radio on. What happened to Gerald Carver was not something Raymond arranged or sought, but the authentication report had been filed with the auction house, and auction houses maintain records, and a journalist who covered estate sales and collectibles for a regional magazine had connections at that auction house. And the story, "Watch sold for $29 at an Ohio jewelry shop fetches $112.00 at auction," ran in 3 publications over the following month. The purchase price listed in the auction record was a matter of public documentation. Gerald Carver's shop name appeared in the provenance trail. Raymond heard about it from Patricia, who had heard about it from the auction house contact, who said that several customers had come forward with questions about other items they had sold to Carver and Sons over the years. The state licensing board opened a review. It was not clear what would come of it. That was not Raymond's concern. What was his concern was the look on Sophie's face the Saturday morning in November when they went together to a small antique market on the edge of town and found in the third booth from the entrance a vintage wristwatch with a silver case and a worn leather strap and a face with a very slight fog at the left edge. The man selling it was an older gentleman with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead who told them it was a 1950s Swiss movement. Nothing special, running a little slow but still ticking. He was asking $12. Raymond picked it up. He looked at it with the full attention he gave to everything mechanical. He wound the crown 2 turns and listened. The movement was steady and even, the way a good movement should be. He paid $12. He handed it to Sophie. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time, the way children look at things they're not sure they're allowed to keep. Then she put it on her wrist. It was too big and slid down toward her hand. She looked up at him and smiled. Not the careful smile she used when she was trying not to want something, but the real one, the one that was still entirely her mother's. Raymond looked at his daughter, standing in the morning light of that market, the watch loose on her small wrist, and he felt the thing in his chest that didn't have a clean name. And this time he let himself feel it all the way through. Some things are worth exactly what you know them to be. The rest depends on who's looking.